Hey Kennedy, this is Dr. Scott. I have some feedback for you on your rhetorical analysis draft. Just as a reminder, some of the things that I'm looking for in this assignment, and there's a lot going on here. Thesis statement, I'm looking for a thesis statement that's focused and that addresses the use of rhetoric in the speech. I'm looking for evidence that supports that thesis statement, so you have body paragraphs that are working to help support that claim that you make in the thesis statement. I'm looking for research that's credible and that's used to help your argument, and it's not just used as filler. I'm looking for focused paragraphs also, and the use of transitions and a clear organization pattern. So you have, in your essay, you have kind of like a skeleton that I think can work, but there's not much on that skeleton. Like, there's not much detail to it. There's also a problem that I'm seeing. Like, I don't know what your thesis statement is just yet. You started with the first body paragraph, that's fine. It's helpful for me to see what your thesis statement is, so I can know if everything is kind of connected. It seems like you're saying that he's persuasive because he uses ethos, pathos, logos. That's a start. That's not where you want to end up. I think to make that a little bit more, I guess, focused, you might mention what audience, and you might hint at why that combination of appeals or how he's using those appeals is particularly persuasive to that audience. So what's really kind of missing right now is a discussion of audience. I think you mentioned later on that it's about the civil rights community or something like that. That's not actually who he was writing to. He was writing to white clergy members in Birmingham, and he was trying to get them to get off their asses and help the civil rights movement. That was his target audience. That's who he literally wrote it to. But he also had other audiences that were probably in mind. Probably folks in the civil rights community, definitely lawmakers and folks that were not from the South that were paying attention to what was happening with civil rights. So he was a pretty savvy guy when it came to the use of persuasion. And one of the audiences is that those white clergy, that's his direct audience, his target audience. I don't think you're going to be able to avoid talking about that, but there's some other audiences that he has. That issue of audience is kind of missing. And the research, I'm not seeing much research in here that's helping you kind of flesh out who that audience is and how he might be persuasive. So that's a big issue to address in the thesis statement, but I also think in these body paragraphs. So let me kind of go through and talk about some of the feedback that I have on your draft. One issue that I'm looking at is organization and use of transitions, and you have this kind of thing where it's like he talks about this, then he talks about this, and then it kind of, the most important is emotion. That last bit is good. I think that that's fine, but I think right now the way that you kind of set up, like the first thing, the second thing, that's not enough. And you'll want to think about what steps he might have needed to take in order to set up that emotional appeal. If that's really what you think is the centerpiece of his argument, what are the things that kind of set that up or support that or make that even more effective? Like, is there a contrast that he uses? He uses logic and then drops an emotional appeal at a particular time. I mean, you kind of want to think through why you're starting with one idea and then going to another. Right now, there's not a very clear reason why we're starting with credibility and then going to logic. So, one issue that I saw in I think all your body paragraphs, they're all pretty short. They're all like they're talking about one example in places. And like, I don't think that there's an example actually in the pathos paragraph, which is kind of a problem. I think you need multiple examples from the text. I see that you're using a paraphrase here. Remember, you need to use a paraphrase of the research that you find. I need to find at least 2 paraphrases in your essay. And I'm fine with you paraphrasing King's speech, I guess. I think it's going to be more effective if you're able to talk about the words that he uses. But there's this thing that I'm noticing in your paragraphs where you'll say, like, all right, this paragraph's about logic. And then you summarize something that happens in the speech, but then you don't explain how that works as logic and then how that works to persuade an audience. So it's just like, yep, this is logic. Here's an example. And okay, I'm done talking about logic. That explanation about like how that's working as logic, why you think it's particularly persuasive, And again, I think using more than one example is kind of a must for this kind of essay. So I think there's a lot of work to do here in the body paragraphs to kind of flesh them out. Particularly in the logic paragraph. And logic's kind of tough to write about. It's like, it's about reasoning. It's like why he is sequencing the argument or arranging the argument in the way that he has it. And there's that stuff that he does where he talks about laws and why some laws it's okay to break them. And he goes through that list of laws like in Hitler's Germany that, there were really awful laws, but they were lawful at the time. That's a use of logic. That's really a use of logic. And you're thinking about who he's persuading at that time. This is the 1960s. These are people in the clergy. They're probably old enough that they were either drafted into World War II or they knew people that were drafted into World War II. That is a fresh example that is going to hit home with them. So again, thinking about audience, thinking about how these things are working as logical appeals and how they are persuading that audience, that's the kind of work that needs to happen in these body paragraphs. In the pathos paragraph, I think was the most fleshed out paragraph that you had. There's a few things in there that to kind of think about. One, there's no real examples from the text, and that's something that kind of jumped out to me, especially when you're talking about emotion. I mean, it's like the choice of words. Why use these words and not others? How are that choice of words, how is that appealing to people? How is it persuasive? How is it evoking emotion? What emotion is it evoking? And then for what audience? That kind of conversation needs to happen in these paragraphs. And right now you've got the quote in there, which is fine. I like how you set up that quote. You can improve it maybe a little bit more. It's good for now. That's awesome, and I like that setup to your paraphrase there. But we're really King's not really in here all that much. His text is not in there, and it needs to be in there. Okay, almost done. One last thing. I think this. I'm with you 100%, but I don't think the body paragraph's a place to do that. I think that this is the way that you conclude the essay. I think it's your conclusion right here. So I'd take that out of here and say, the emotion in his speech rings true now. And let me explain that. That's your conclusion, I think. These body paragraphs need more examples, need to explain your examples a lot more, need to connect things back to your thesis statement, and that thesis statement needs to have some kind of indication of what audience that you're talking about. So that's my feedback. If you have questions, you should be reaching out to me. You've got a ways to go with this essay, but again, you've got a skeleton to work with. Let's put some flesh on that skeleton. Happy Halloween. Bye, Kennedy.